right, everybody. I've got two very special guests for y'all this week. Everybody, please welcome to the show Morgan and Owen Rosenblum. Welcome,
What's up?
guys.
Yo,
What's going on?
So this might be a first. It might be my first brother pairing. So
Really?
we'll see how this goes.
first time for everything.
But I guess we'll start you guys off where I start off all my new guests. Kind of the origin story. We don't have to go too deep because it's two of you, but basically, like, when did you guys get into comics, and at what point do you want to start creating things?
Do you want me to
So
go first?
Whoever wants to jump in, yeah.
Age before beauty. I'm the older brother, so I'll go first. So we got into comics around the same time because, like, it was our dad that I guess first, introduced us to comics. Owen and I have like terrible ADHD, and we couldn't sit still to read, especially when it was just words without pictures. And then so my dad had the bright idea of like, hey, maybe they'll go for words with pictures kind of thing, and then took us to a comic book shop, and we started going nuts. And that was, I think, right around when Spawn 1 came out, because that's the first comic I ever remember like getting into, like sort of like from the ground floor. Right? Like we had watched like X-Men, like the animated series and things like that, and other cartoons. So like we gravitated towards like X-Men comics and things like that. But X-Men had been around for a while. So Spawn was like kind of like the first comic that I think I gravitated towards and got into, and like had like the first 26 I think issues that I collected like every month or whenever it was that they came out. And then as far as like when did we start creating comics, because so like I'm an artist, not professionally, but I am a professional art director and creative director. But anyway, like growing up, I used to draw a lot, and I would draw like superheroes and comic like type characters. And in like my mid 20s, I was like in a career path that was like far away from creative. It was like just like sales. I was like a sales guy making phone calls, doing like cold call sales, and I was like, I hate this. I want to be creative. Like, what am I doing? And so, and at the time, Owen had started his own creative production company. And so I was like watching him like do all this cool stuff and living his dream, and, at least pursuing his dream. And I was like, I want to do something like that. So I just started writing like a screenplay that with the intention of like maybe turning it into a comic book. And then at that point, like I think I started looking for different artists online to try to hire someone that would kind of match my vision. And it was this artist, Ray Dillon, at the time, to turn like the first 10 pages of my script into a comic book. And from there, I launched a Kickstarter, and it wound up doing really well. And I'm, as a salesperson too, I was like very aggressive, going to all my friends and family, being like, "This is my project, you have to check it out," and selling it to them. And it wound up like doing well and kind of getting people's attention. And ultimately, that kind of started me on that career. And one thing led to another, and then eventually, like, I got a job working as a junior editor at Heavy Metal magazine, and then kind of worked my way up to managing editor, and then have been in comics, like pretty much for like about 12 to 15 years now, something like that. It's been pretty cool. And yeah, so that's my whole backstory. Owen, your turn. I'm gonna plug in my
I will give the abridged version, as opposed to the long drawn out version. Yeah. So as I said, as Morgan said, he's been in the comic kind of graphic novel development space for a lot longer than I have. I've helped him with some of the business side of stuff, but I'm a producer by trade. So out of college, I started a video production company where I did short form branded content. And I was like used to being on set and doing commercials and music videos, events, fashion shorts, kind of all that type of stuff. And seeing Morgan operate in the comic graphic novel medium, and being that, like, we grew up, as Morgan said, reading Spawn and X-Men and things like that. Wildcats, shout out to Wildcats. I looked at what he was doing with Kickstarter and things like that, and I wanted to get involved. And we started Dark Rose Studios, which is our creative development studio agency kind of thing. And one thing, I don't
like calling it an agency, but sure.
Yeah. Oh, as I said, I come from a different world.
I know. I'm like, no, we're a creative boutique studio, like workshop, a lab.
Workshop, lab, all those things. But I guess with Ramgod specifically, that was something that came about during COVID, actually. And Morgan and I were living together at the time. So when we're like together in the same like actual physical location, we can get a ton done. And he was, I think, playing Cyberpunk 2020. why am I blanking? 2077.
2077. Yeah.
Yeah. And was playing it, and I mean their world building is absolutely fantastic. And I think I had just rewatched Blade Runner 2049. So like Cyberpunk was like super in my mind, and this was like at the time when everyone was like watching their Amazon packages and thinking the world was going to end. So we were just kind of like escaping into our own like creative worlds, and then kind of Ramgod was born from that. And yeah, I mean, we drew in a bunch of different influences from our childhood, and yeah, that's kind of when now we're here. I know I'm kind of probably leaving a bunch of important stuff out. Morgan, fill in the blanks.
Well, I stepped away for a second to go grab a water bottle because I'm very parched, so I don't know which part that you may have already said.
Well,
but,
I was gonna say we could kind of rewind a little bit because Dark Rose Studios, that's your umbrella that you guys are working under, which is doing a bunch of different things. And I see that you published with Dark Horse Comics the Winds of Numsara.
Yeah, that's our our epic fantasy, dark fantasy series. Kind of like our Game of Thrones meets Lord of the Rings, a little Dragon Age in there, some never-ending story, and a little bit of Willow.
So, did that come about before Ramgod, or was that after?
No, that was before. Ramgod's our most recent. Like that's like the newest thing that we have out right now.
Yep.
In fairness, we do have like a Winds of Numsara board game as well. Like we're generally working on projects simultaneously because once you get into like the art stage, since we aren't doing the physical artwork on it, and we're using artists for it and having real human beings work on it, like it gives us time to like redirect to something else and work on writing that while the artists are sort of like doing their thing, and then we start like getting the projects in. But yeah, Winds of Numsara started I think in like 2016, 17 or something like that, where we started like working on the idea and then planning it out into this like big series. And then like the book was finished, I think in like 2020, and we launched it on Kickstarter around that time. And then Dark Horse, I think, published it. Like once we launched on a Kickstarter, we only funded like half the book because it's a chunky book. It's like 224 pages of awesomeness. And to finish like the first arc right in the story, we needed to raise a little bit more money. So we shopped the first half of it. We submitted that to a few different publishers, Dark Horse being one of them, and one of the editors over there, Freddie Miller, who's awesome. Shout out to her. She fell in love with the series, kind of coached us up on what changes we might want to consider to strengthen the story, and she had some really awesome feedback, and then we implemented that stuff into the rest of the book, and then they published that one in 2022. And sort of while this was all going on, because like we had already had a Kickstarter out, we started getting like emails and like DMs being like, yo, I read the book from Kickstarter, like can't wait for the back half. Like, have you guys thought about making this a video game or a board game? And we're like, both would be awesome. Video games probably a higher fruit, like out of reach a little bit for us, just expensive wise. And like board games, we're like, well, we already have a lot of the artwork, so we play some board games. How hard can this be? And little did we know it was extremely hard. And we made it look really, really pretty right out of the gate. But like the first iteration of the game was like, meh, not very good. And not because we didn't think it was good. We thought it was great. But like when we play tested it, we just got some honest feedback that said it kind of was like not fun. And so this set us on a mission to like make it really fun and just keep taking feedback, revising the game, testing it again, going to conventions, testing it, revising, blah, 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 blah. Fast forward like about 5 years of that. And then we finally had like a game that people were like, when can I buy this? And that's when we just launched a Kickstarter, which ended last month. And so for anyone who did miss out and they're like, oh man, I wanted to get in on that, like you can still. There's like a small little window that's going on for about another 3 weeks. So like if you go to the Kickstarter, it'll take you to the Pledge Manager where you can still get in and grab a copy of that game before it's off the market for a year.
That's interesting. Like I laugh when you say, "Oh, we'll just make this game real quick," because I've being a board game fan and seeing and hearing a lot about it, I know how hard it can be. And,
also, as Morgan kind of alluded to as well, is like world building is huge for us, and our thing is like it kind of gave us another, I would just say, format to kind of expand our world and our characters and have people engage with it in a different way. than you would reading a graphic novel or a comic series kind of thing. And that was it was a very rewarding experience for us creatively to just think of like, you're creating everything from items, to just like the different characters and how they work.
Like, how do they play? Like, how do you play as them? Like, is it just something as simple as like stats, or like do they have powers? And then when we started thinking about that, it's like, well, how do we make each power feel unique to the characters as they read in the story? Like, what power should Lelia have? What power should Kelisandra have, or Sorcha? Like, they all have different powers based off of like who they are in the game, in the book. And one of the cool things that we've had happen is that some of the people who've read the book and then also played the game, because like I said, we've been playtesting it for years at this point, so it's sort of been around in like smaller circles. And those who have sort of experienced both are like, yo, this is awesome how you guys managed to capture the essence of like your characters and world in a playable experience that actually offers like freedom to the players. Because like I said, you're not playing a linear story. In the book, there's like one main empire, Numasera, hence why it's called Winds of Numasera, that rule over, they sort of like become the like the Roman Empire to a degree, right? But in like our fantasy world, whereas like in the board game, like you can play as Numasera, but you can also play as like the other vassals or the ones that were conquered or wiped out or that rebelled, and then change history in it. And pretty much like you can become the empire, which is cool. So it like kind of like lets you rewrite the story, but with the same components.
So when you're creating, I mean, anything, but I would be specific to this book. Are you looking to build something bigger, or is that like the main focus? Is it like we can create this thing and then it can expand to other things, or is it really the focus just that one story and then you just see what happens from there?
Great question. Yeah, Morgan, go ahead. I just love that question.
Yeah, we love that question. I mean, so everything we're storytellers at heart. I don't like saying I'm a comic writer. That's where I have like sort of my biggest claim to fame, if you'd even call it that. Like I've had the most sort of career success thus far, or at least experience in comics, because that's where I have over 20 different published titles and stuff like that in the comics realm. But I also want to work in TV. When we write these stories and create them, we're not solely thinking like of them only in one medium or one, I don't know, like interpretation. It's like we imagine it as like, how would this look as like, and not even for the money part of it, but like how would it look as a video game or an action figure? Because anyone can say like this would be great as, but it's like, well, but how would it actually look and play? And so a lot of the times, like when we go into this stuff with Dark Rose, we go in like trying to make at least sort of like a version of each of those things. And usually we start, when I say small, we start at the things that are the most achievable. So like prose novel books, which is like, I would say the cheapest to make, simply because like you don't have to pay an artist to write. We're the artists in this, we're writing the book. Then comics and graphic novels, it's a little bit more expensive because you have to pay the artist to do it, since we're not doing the artwork ourselves. The board games even probably more, because you have a lot more manufacturing costs involved to like make the components and packaging and things like that. And then obviously you work your way up to like video games or mobile games, and then TV and film. Like it just gets sort of harder to achieve success in those things. But the goal from the get-go is like, we want to create powerful, engaging, inspiring stories with characters that are well-grounded and relatable, and worlds that are vivid and expansive. And the goal is to see what sticks, right? We're not just throwing spaghetti at a wall, right? And hoping, like, oh, that one's stuff. We're creating stories that we like, that we would love, that we, would have resonated with us as kids and things like that, and even as adults. Because that's kind of a big hybrid for us, is sort of like finding that concentric circle between what it feels like to be a kid, full of wonder and just sort of like wide-eyed and like, oh man, anything's possible, with a sense of like plausibility and groundedness and relatability that adults need, and then sort of merging those two. And then that's where Dark Rose sort of sits, I think.
Yeah.
Do you agree with all that, Owen?
Yeah. I mean, Morgan said a lot of it. Like we grew up on the Transformers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and like those kind
X-Men.
X-Men. That like they go, as we said before, like they're board games, they're toys. There's just like shirts. It was a total immersive experience, and like we speak as fans of those stories and those companies and all types of things. And like our thing is, we look to them and they kind of paved the way, and we're trying to emulate some of those things in our own sense. and bring, new stories to the forefront. And it's, it's competitive, obviously, and there are barriers to entry for each different type of thing that we're doing. But kind of, we're out there. We're risk takers. We are an ambitious group, and we believe that, our sci-fi and fantasy properties have what it takes.
Yeah, and looking through what you guys have going on at Dark Rose, like you've mentioned the board games and you've mentioned the comics and obviously the pros. And the things that stick out to me is, I mean, obviously I'm a big comic fan. That's why I'm here. But another thing that I'm a big fan of is video games. And you guys have brought it up a few times. And I see one here that you have on the website, Treadwater.
Yeah. So Treadwater was our firstborn. That was like, remember I was saying when I, 12 years ago or whatever, I always say 12 years ago, but I think now it's more than that. Whatever it was, the first one I ever did, it was like sheer passion project, had no experience, but had an idea that I've been working on, for years that just kind of sat up here and just manifest, like it was just bubbling around, but never really putting pen and paper. That became Treadwater, which ultimately started as like a graphic novel on Kickstarter. And then it did well. We were fortunate enough to like get some like angel investors, people that really saw it as a potential to like be the next, X-Men or like a Walking Dead type of franchise, because the numbers were good for the initial graphic novel sales, like surprisingly good. We made an indie bestseller list on our opening month, like right on par with the Walking Dead's issue 1 sales and stuff. So that kind of like put us on the map where people are like, oh, this is serious. And because of like Owen's background, like or the team that we had involved in that, having other sort of like multimedia experience that went outside of comics, and the goal sort of always having been like TV and video and like expansive, right? This sort of 360-degree transmedia universe type of vibe. We were able to raise a little bit of money to sort of create prototypes of everything. So we couldn't afford to make like a full, AAA video game, but we could make a AAA video game level. And that's what we did. So we made like a full demo level, which is taken right out of the pages of the comic. It's literally like one of the scenes in the graphic novel that you can now play, where you get to play as like, there's, Treadwater's all about, these sort of like souped up operatives. That is, each one of them has like a sort of a special like technology that like enhances their abilities. And there's 6 in the program, but you can play as 2 on that mission, which is pretty cool. And it's funny too, because like we were limited with budget. So while it doesn't look that way, I don't think it looks like a pretty decent game, especially when considering it was made like 12 years ago. But the fact is that like we could only choose so many animations for, like we could only afford to do like I think like 6 or 7 animations per character. So like there was no like sort of slow walk. It was like creep, walk, sprint. There was no like the gradual jog kind of thing. So there was like just like funny little things like where we had to like make choices on. It's like and then also like turning directions. They kind of like they do like hard pivots as opposed to like more natural moves and things like that. But anyway, like we still feel pretty good about it. There's on the website there's like a little demo playthrough of the video. There's like a little cutscene, and that was like a big undertaking, right? Because we're hiring like voice actors, sound designers, original like musicians to make original scores. As well as like obviously like the original character concept artist that did like the 2D artwork, and then transforming that into the 3D artwork, and then creating the animations from like the wireframes of the characters. Like it's such a process. And like every single avenue, like we learn, like we have to learn the process. So graphic novels, writing for a graphic novel, comic formatted script, that's like a skill set in and of itself, which is different from like a traditional sort of feature film writing, script writing format, which is different from prose writing format for like, a novel and things. They all have like different styles and ways that you do it. And you just sort of like, we do a lot of research and a lot of like learning and then consulting with other people that have done this. We always seek out other people that have done it the way we want to do it. And we're like, hey, huge fan of yours. We always try to like point out the things we love. I watched this film or I read this book of yours and I really related to this character and here's why. I always try to really personalize it because I've had that happen to me a couple of times, like, not often, but like every once in a while, a fan will reach out and they're like, oh, I just read your book. And, when they tell, like, sometimes we're like, I'd love to pick your brain. But when they actually give me, like, they regurgitate something to me, like that I wrote that impacted them and they explain to me why, that immediately hits in a heartstring for me, where I give them my attention. I'm like, cool, you really get this. And like, I appreciate you appreciating what I wrote. And so we always try to do that when we're reaching out to people. right? So that we can, that when we do reach out, that like it means something. It's not like us asking for a favor per se. It's like, you impacted me, and I think I can learn something from you. And I'm no schlum either. Take a look at what I'm doing. Like,
yeah,
I'd love,
and everyone's got to start somewhere, right? Like we like, I remember going to our first like Comic-Con and just like being at the panels and just raising our hands constantly, you know, to try to
obnoxiously, just like,
yeah, obnoxiously, but like we didn't know, you know, and we learned a lot through doing and like kind of like fucking up, to be honest. And like you learn more through your mistakes and failures than you do through your successes, you know. But they are things that just make you, I think, better at the end of the day. And you use, you know, funds more wisely. You're more strategic. You just, you know, you're chiseling the marble down. And I think that, you know, as Morgan said, like we've been doing this for a long time, and Morgan, you know, has more experience than I do in comics and graphic novels. But like I come from set. When you were talking about like, hey, like film or TV endeavors and your goals, like that's the world that I come from. So that was where I cut my teeth to begin with. So like Morgan and I are like kind of meeting in the middle in this way. And as I said, that's what gravitated, you know, at least that's why I gravitated towards the comic stuff, because it was a complete different medium for me. And I'd messed around with something that my older brother, you know, had experience in, and I can learn a lot from him, and I have.
I mean, in fairness, I'm still learning too, Chris. Like, I've learned a lot, but you know, I definitely don't know everything, and I try to make sure that I'm always aware of that, so that, you know, I got to learn from some really awesome people, especially while I was at Heavy Metal. I got to learn under like Joseph Village, Tim Seeley, and people like that, who are like David Irwin, who are like legends in the space. Like really, you know, experienced and, you know, strong creatives with just a natural creative gift, but also like a lot of training and experience, like where I was like soaking up knowledge and like, teach me. I was like an annoying shadow with a lot of them, as opposed to being like, you know, I'm good, I got this, or just keep your mouth shut. I wanted to, anytime I got around those guys, I was like trying to get as much information as possible.
Yeah. And as we were kind of talking about before, and we'll segue this to Ramgod soon, because that was the
yeah.
we were booked here, and to Massive as well, who's a fantastic publisher. But like this was, as I said, Morgan was creating titles for a while, and I like, as I said, I cut my teeth in production, right? So I was typically working with other people on their creative endeavors as opposed to kind of my own, and being, you know, a creator and a writer. And this was the first thing that I had created and written, at least as a comic, and obviously brought in Morgan to do this with me. And this was the first like Brothers Bloom kind of creative endeavor here.
Well, yeah, like, so Chris, for some context, like we had partnered on stuff before, but we'd never written something together exclusively, right? So for like Treadwater, Owen's my partner in that. He ultimately came on after like the first book. I had finished and published the first book, but then when I was looking at, like, we did this live action component too. Obviously, we did the video game component, but we literally casted live actors, got like a dope costume designer and makeup artist to like come in, and a really good VFX person that worked on, that's a buddy of ours now, this guy Robbie Elliott, who worked on like X-Men, like Days of Future Past and things like that, to like add in some real great like CGI elements. And like we filmed some like short scenes that we created this whole interactive website experience that's designed to make it feel like you as the user, as the person, have somehow, when you go to the website, it makes it feel like you've accidentally gotten into their program, like their network, their secret, you know, like whatever, like the dark web kind of thing. And they like video time you with like recorded messages they send you. And ultimately they start trying to recruit you and give you like missions to go on and to do, and then report back. And so like we built this like cool little experience for that. But, you know, just doing all of this stuff, like Owen had really helped lead the ship on that. But we had never like started from the beginning making a series together from the start. And Ramgod is that.
It's so interesting that like my world from video production and Morgan's from like comics, and then we're like meeting in the middle kind of, and like taking each other both ways. It's like turning the volume kind of up. It's like, oh, comics, graphic novels, the interactive websites, you know, it's just like, that's just kind of how we work. You know, we're just like, immerse yourself in the story and the world building, and like next, level up kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny to me in this world of like IP that we live in, where I see people complain a lot now, like when they get sick of an IP. And right now, like the two big ones to always bitch and moan about are Marvel, Star Wars.
Yeah.
And two of my favorite IPs. And I've always thought, like, especially Star Wars, ever since I was a little kid, like Star Wars has been there. It's always there. It's always around me. And when people were starting to get their break from it because there were no more movies and everything, I was still going to get in the comics. And I was still going to get in the board games. And I was playing every video game.
Video games, yeah. The video games
and just going on. And to this day, where if you put some out Star Wars, you have my attention. And I'd say, I think people, especially in our realm, we get sucked into a world where our fandom takes us in directions where as long as it stays good, and that's the big thing, is you have to, especially when you're not a Star Wars or a Marvel and you're not the biggest thing on the planet, if you can keep everything to the highest quality possible, you can keep people around for these worlds as long as that the world building is there and people have become invested through them. So everything you guys are talking about is really cool to me, especially from a more independent side as opposed to a big corporation side. And I think it's a great way to move over to Ramgod, because I could listen to you guys talking about all this stuff forever, and I would love to have you back for some of the other stuff you guys have done in the future. But we do have Ramgod, and I would love to, you teamed up with Massive, so let's start with what is Ramgod. Like, tell the audience what the book's about and give them a little primer for what they can expect.
You want to do this, or you want me to do it? You want Chris to do it?
No, sorry.
It's a comic book, everybody.
Yeah, no, because we're just pointed. I don't know if it's different for everyone else, but on my thing, he's put.
My mic was muted because there was like background noise or whatever.
No worries.
but go ahead, bro.
So it's a Ramgod, the comic series. It's a 6-issue comic arc for the first sort of season, as we refer to it, or the first arc, and it's a cyberpunk action heist thriller. So we always liken it, like, as far as comparison, what is it kind of like? People have said it's a little bit like The Running Man. It's we always liken it to like Fast and the Furious meets Point Break, like the original with Keanu Reeves, but like in a cyberpunk setting. So obviously there's a law enforcement aspect of it. We follow like this patrolman named Clint Buller, who we find out is like this former superstar collegiate football player that like had the highest sort of like potential that you can imagine. He was supposed to be like the next LeBron James, but for football, right? Like gifted athlete that was just better than everybody else. Mm-hmm. But he was like kind of in with like a bad crowd, which we find out was like the Chinese mob, right? And it's like, how does like a black kid get into like with the Chinese mob? Well, you find out that like his high school like Pop Warner teammate from childhood, right? Like his best friend Kevin, like his uncle was like the head of the Chinese mob, and like kind of always just was like the godfather, was his godfather, and ultimately it took him under his wing. So anyway, Clint gets involved with a lot of bad stuff, winds up getting implicated for like money laundering and crime syndication and things like that. Even though like he didn't officially get charged with it, he was just implicated. The NFL like sort of cut ties with him, blacklisted him. The story begins 15 years later, which by the way takes place like in like 2085. So we're already way in the future. Mm-hmm. And there's this new sport that's out now called Ramgod, and it's this sort of like modern day gladiator sport that is like part racing, part combat, part climbing. And you're like, climbing, not like wall climbing. We're talking like descend down an active volcano, like, or an avalanche kind of thing, like man-made, things like that. And it's just like the course is always changing. The vehicles change. You got some cool tech armor. Anywho, Clint has a 15-year-old kid who's he's not particularly close with. He's got like split custody. He sees him once a month. And he's just, like kind of a deadbeat dad who just never seems to get his priorities right. And he gets an opportunity to try out for the Barracudas, which is Malcolm, his son's favorite team. And without spoiling too much, that opportunity opens a huge door for him to kind of reconnect with his kid, who's a huge Barracudas fan and Ramgod fan. Barracudas is the name of the team that is his favorite team. Mm-hmm. And then he also now is starting to get that stardom back, right? Like he's becoming relevant again. former, NFL prospect turned nobody cop, like winds up getting a second chance, like in his later years, and is now like becoming a star again. People are asking for his autograph, but what we find out, and this is where like the sort of dark crime heist aspect takes place, is that the team that he's now a part of are like actually moonlighting as good old fashioned bank robbers in the the modern era, and they pretty much rope him into this whole thing. And it winds up like instead of him being like an undercover cop that's trying to like infiltrate it, he doesn't know, right, that this is going on. And then once he does know and find out, he has to make that choice between, do I do what's morally right and and turn them in, and and give up this second opportunity of me being like a superstar and on this team, or do I kind of continue down this dark path, and that I have some ties to, reconnecting with my son all along the way, but also putting him in danger because he's now tied to this group. And so it's got that sort of like fine line between doing what's right and what's cool, and the implications and consequences that come with that. And there's a lot of really cool characters that each have like some fun motivations and unique personalities, and the relationships between them. There's some fun romance in there that's going on. It's just a really cool world. So if you're into cyberpunk, the artwork's incredible. That's like an homage cover to Heat. So we love the movie Heat, which I think, Michael Mann, not Michael Bay.
I said Michael Mann.
Oh, yeah, Michael Bay, who's also okay. Early Michael Bay, yeah, like The Rock, Michael Bay.
Exactly.
When I was going through and looking at the book on Massive's website, I bring up this cover in particular because these covers by Carlos Detali are phenomenal. They're the perfect covers for this book.
Thank you.
We agree. When we found him, we saw it immediately. Yeah. He's a pleasure to work with too. I mean, all of these artists were awesome to work with, but he also paints in like 3D space. So interestingly enough, like he doesn't like create a full 3D object where you can, because we thought when he told us this, and we were like, oh, cool. So you mean to tell us that like we'll be able to like get different angles and stuff? He's like, no. Pick like once you pick the angle, I'll start to build it in a 3D space, and then he draws over it. So that's why it has that like real 3D rendered look.
Mm-hmm.
But he does like begin all of the stuff in like 3D so that it has that that real pop to it.
Yeah, and I'll say like all the covers I look at are really good, but there's something about his that just make the book seem so much more appealing. And it's no offense to any other artist, it's just that certain covers just work really well for different comics. But what I really like about when I was reading about the book was this aspect that I wish there was more of a connection in our world with. And if you can't tell by the hat, like big sports fan. And so
which mean forward?
Eagles.
Oh, Eagles. Yeah. I'm a huge football fan. I'm a diehard Jets fan. So that was a tough loss, by the way, against the Falcons Monday, man.
Yeah, I'm still recovering from that one, but I loved when I was reading about it that was a big aspect, was that this guy's a sports star and he's getting it's that old story that we see across sports for generations of the guy getting a second chance, and what does he do with that second chance? So obviously you said you're a sports fan, and then my question was going to be, how much does that go into the story and trying to tell the stories of stuff you've watched throughout the years in these different sports?
Well, I also think that one thing that a lot of people don't really understand, that aren't sports fans, don't really understand about sports, is that it's all about the stories in sports.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about like your team beating the other team or losing to their team. You watch any broadcast journalist, they always try to find stories. Well, here's an interesting story. Do you know about this guy that made the team recently? He was an undrafted free agent, lived in his car for 6 years. And like, I love hearing those aspects of it because it makes you relate a lot more to those players. And even, and there's complete opposite versions of the stories, which is like, this is the over the hill, 40-year-old quarterback that, 4-time MVP that missed all of last season and perhaps is over the hill and a little politically incorrect in a lot of things or whatever. I'm talking about Aaron Rodgers, who's but that's just like, those are like different storylines that you can find, and any great sports story, And they don't all need to be like the Cinderella story or the underdogs. Like sometimes, I mean, underdog stories are fantastic. And we definitely have like an aspect of that. I like fall from grace stories, which is like kind of the redemption arc story, where like they once were great, but no longer, or they botched an opportunity. And then like, you know, what do you do if you get another opportunity, which is really what this story is about. But like, so there's a lot of that's going on. Like we were looking, when we were creating Ramgod, we were like, okay, because it's not a real sport with like a real team or history, like no one will care about the sport. So it visually needs to be very exciting, A, right? Mm-hmm. B, it needs to have some cool stuff like in it, right? Like so like when we thought of like Hunger Games or Mario Kart or Tron, when you think about like the unique elements of their sports, or even like Quidditch, right? And like Harry Potter and stuff, like they created new sports in a lot of these cases or competitions that like, you know, like the rules seem fun. And even if you don't fully get it, you get the overall concept of it and it's exciting.
And there are relatable elements.
There's what?
I said relatable elements. I'm saying, because like we said before, we have like race, it's like race that's like Formula One, NASCAR, and then combat that's like UFC or boxing or whatever, you know.
But also Roman gladiator. So like one of the cool things too about Ramgod that you'll see throughout like the series is that like in issue 1, you're actually like jumping onto the storyline in the finals of like the current season. When I say season, like the sports season. So it'd be like joining into the Super Bowl, right? You're like watching Super Bowl and that's your introduction. So you're not seeing the regular season. You're only seeing 2 teams and there's 8 in the league and they square off. And then after that, right, like we go into the off season where like a lot of what we learn is like a lot of the rules of Ramgod, because it's a newish sport, it's been around for only a few years, they're trying new things every year. They're like, hey, maybe we add a new player. Like now every team has to expand their roster by 1. Oh, and now we're changing it to like, you have 5 players on each team, but you can only throw 4 into a given match. So you have to have 1 person on the bench at all times. So it makes like, and you know, you can only, there's 8 events throughout the year. Like it gave Owen and I a lot of sort of runway or canvas to it, like sort of like paint this new sport, right? And come up with like cool ideas for it and sort of experiment in real time with it, which we kind of do. So we have our set rules, but like it's constantly evolving. And so at its core though, we were like, we love the idea of like this whole Mario Kart styled boost / like also like Hunger Games where like everyone has like this suit, which is like when you look at these characters, they're not superheroes. This is their tech, right? They're almost like tight fitting, you know, race armor or like astronaut gear or whatever it is. And like inside of it, it has like weapons, jetpacks, parachutes, you know, shields, everything you can imagine. The interesting thing though is that when they begin the race or their event, none of it's turned on, but it's all in there. And the only way that you can activate these special abilities is by unlocking them, sort of by doing either like finding them on the course, like Mario Kart, right? Like you go over the digital thing and it's like, boop, you've gotten a boost and now you can activate it, or you can actually unlock it by achieving certain milestones, right? Like if like you hit a certain number of points during a certain match, it's like, cool, you just you unlocked your jetpack kind of thing. And so now what we played around with Owen and I is that like during the climb, right, which is generally like reserved as like the final stage of the relay or the match, if you don't have like a boost, right, that means you don't have a parachute or a jetpack, and like you have limited jet fuel if you have any at all. So which means if you fall off of that mountain or that skyscraper, because they literally have to scale a skyscraper building, which is nuts, they will just fall to their death. And now the league could have obviously just been like, turn it on, save those people, but they don't. They're like, nah, bad for ratings, right? So it's like you have to be very smart and also kind of crazy to even participate in the sport to begin with. But it pays like ridiculous amounts of stuff. And it's not going for the normal athletes. It's kind of going for like kind of just balls to the wall, crazy athletes who have probably a screw loose. And then we even got like, Chris, we even got like a little nuts with what are their, like, you know how like there's steroids obviously in like regular pro sports. So we're like, what is the steroids for this? And we're like, well, in Cyberpunk, they always play with like mods, right? Modifications, like, you know, you get like net gear and different cybernetic enhancements. We're like, well, we have that too. That's kind of inherent in the Cyberpunk genre. But that's the steroid. So it's like if you become too modded out, right? Like you pass you cross the threshold, and then you're sort of like eliminated because you're like too metal. So you actually have to like, you can only push it to a certain degree. But then like there's now, certain teams that are trying to find ways to cheat by using like plastics instead of metals and things like that to like sort of slip under the radar. So what we'll find is there's like a lot of corruption and cheating like going on in the league too. There's a lot of like rivalries and like beefs going on, which is cool. Even create like there in issue 6 is on or issue 5, or is it 4? 4. I don't know. Maybe issue 4. We've swapped around like how many, like it started, by the way, like as an 8-chapter book, which were like shorter. And then like, when we moved to Massive as a publisher, we moved it to 7. And then they're like, let's actually combine it to 6. 6 is like a nice even number. So we're like, okay. Yep. So that when I'm like, which one is it again? That's part of why I don't remember, is because like we've condensed it and changed the total number of like just kind of like how we slice the pizza, right? So now they're just like bigger slices. But anyway, when we like introduce the 8 teams, like we've designed every single player, and there's like 5 players on 8 teams. What is that? 40 different character designs just for like the athletes. Plus each one has their own like engineer, so like that's an extra one. So like even just go like, and the logos for like all of the teams,
all of the Cyberpunk,
who the sponsors were for each one. What does the sponsor own? Like what sort of genre do they operate in? So like one of the things that Owen really came up with that I thought was super cool was that like each sponsor kind of owned a sector. So like one is like the sanitation, they like handle sanitation. One does like med tech, medical technology. One is
we kind of
military technology.
We kind of wanted to, that we were thinking about it. We were like, what would be that, like the parallel to like today? It would be like Jeff Bezos and Amazon being like a sponsor.
The sponsor,
of the Eagles. Do you know what I mean? And own the Eagles kind of thing. And then,
like he was the owner, not even the sponsor, right? It was like sponsors are owners. So it's like,
I'm just saying that because we always say like, if you had, like all of the owners or CEOs of every major corporation for the most part, the top 10.
Elon Musk owned a team, and it was a team that was where he was allowed to give sort of like his own products to it. It wasn't just money they poured into it, but he could be like, I'm going to give like my SpaceX technology to my team to utilize that the other teams cannot use in it, right? Which we thought was like, that's cool. So the owners, they can actually add like an unfair advantage in certain things to some degree too, right? Like maybe they have better armor or better like sort of like honing beacons, or like created different boosts and things like that too. So
it's like how the Denver Broncos are owned by the Walmart family.
Are they now? They didn't used to. That's like more recent, right?
Yeah, that's the past couple of years. Yeah. So I love listening to you guys talk. So I was trying not to interrupt, but I have to ask this because it's going through my head as you're describing the sport. How much Call of Duty and Halo have you played?
Oh, fair amount. Probably more Halo than Call of Duty.
Halo more.
It does. I mean, I'm getting very heavy like online shooter vibes, and I was pointing towards Halo because obviously just the futuristic style gets brings you to it. But yeah, I was getting a lot of vibes in that direction. So was that like an influence there?
I don't think either of those games honestly were. Maybe like Halo, like armor wise to a degree. I would say actually, have you seen Anthem, the video game Anthem?
Yeah.
So Anthem was heavy, and like we loved, while the game wasn't great, we loved like the suits. We thought that those like,
flying around that world was so much fun.
Yeah, it was so much fun, and we were like, that's kind of like for us, that was like the climb. You know how like you have like the little jet, but it's not indefinite jetpacks that like runs out. So you have to be like, we're like, that'd be kind of cool if like you can only use them a little bit, and then like maybe it regenerates.
There was also this is a throwback. There was this show we used to watch called Centurions back in the day, and that was another influence for us.
Power Extreme. Have you ever seen that or no?
No.
It's cool. So there was like some sort of like teleport. They had like this almost like exosuit that would like come onto them when they would say the words Power Extreme, and it would like be teleported down like sort of Spock like or Star Trek like onto them and like assemble over them.
And there was like they had specialties. It was like land, air, and
there was 3 operatives in it, and one was like for the sea, one was for the land, like he'd all like tank based or motorcycle based or racing based stuff. One was like all flying. His name was Ace, and he was like the the pilot guy. So all of his suit stuff would let him like fly and do that. One of them was like Submariner style, was always underwater. So we were that definitely had a little influence on it. But like to be even in the combat stuff, there's no, at the moment at least not in season 1, There's no like shooting like events. It's all like hand to hand. Like the combat is all hand. There are weapons though, but it's like gladiator style stuff. So like there's this dope battle royale that takes place in the like once we finally reintroduce like the season again, because the next, like I said, in issue 1 you're seeing the Super Bowl, which is just one-on-one, but the way the sport works is during the regular season it's like all 8 teams compete free for all. So like then when you see like 8 different teams, 2 players a pop, all in like one arena, so you got 16 different fighters on like a giant raised disc platform that is literally collapsing and getting smaller and smaller every 30 seconds. And the last 5 people or 6 people on the ring are the only ones that get points. So it's like literally, kick, dodge, duck, and dump people off the sides of the ring. Like that's like a fun event. So like we're always playing around with like what would be a cool thing to see.
I don't know if Morgan mentioned this before because you said a lot on this. It's that the sport itself is like structured like the Olympics. So it's like a point aggregate system kind of thing. So like our whole thing was like because there are obviously sports that even if you're a sports fan, there are certain sports you're just not that into. And we were like, what creates kind of like makes more skin in the game? So if you're someone on your team is in combat, if they do well, could those boosts, quote unquote, like their performance help you in the race kind of thing and give you a competitive advantage? And that was just something we thought was really cool and we haven't seen done before that we wanted to play around with.
So like for further context, we would watch, I remember I would watch NASCAR and be like, I'm bored of watching people go in circles, right? And that's just my own personal preference. Plenty of people love NASCAR, and there's I'm sure a lot of nuance that I don't understand. But like there's definitely moments in NASCAR I'm like, that was awesome, but I can usually get on the highlights. So I was like, well, what if you were like in last place and like you already knew you kind of lost this race? Like there's no real reason to keep watching your guy go around in circles, right? If they're like really that far behind. It's like if you were watching, an Eagles game or whatever, I'm watching a Jets game and they're, they got Zach Wilson out there and he's they're down by 30 points. Like, okay, maybe like I'll keep watching but like we have no real shot of winning this game. So anyway, Owen and I were like, well, what if you, like the drivers, also had another teammate that was competing in a completely different event simultaneous to the ongoing marathon race, like a one-on-one UFC fight. And because the UFC fighter was part of the same NASCAR team, whatever like if they won their fight, they could actually unlock like a nice, like a NOS type thing or like catch up 4 laps or something like that. And that led us to like, cool, that's ADHD like at its finest. That's like red zone for multiple sport, like the Olympics, where it's like bouncing, or actually that's a cool analogy, red zone for the Olympics, where it's literally like jumping around from like key moments of other things going on, but they're all connected. And that kind of led to like, oh, this could be fun. So while one race is going on, you have the teammates fighting, earning like potentially boosts to get their teammates to catch up or get a bigger lead in that race.
It's what Morgan was saying. Like we just put a lot of thought of like what would get people to be invested in this thing and like really care and be, as he said, like adrenaline overload, stimulus overload. Because we were like in our world, we were thinking like the way in which we're going is like everyone's plugged in, right? They're plugged in to a screen, whatever. It's just them. And like we always talk about this, like sports there's a camaraderie thing, right? Even just watching it together, it brings you kind of out of your shell a little bit, whether you're at a live sports event, whether you're watching it with someone else.
It's the easiest place to make new friends too, when you both like the same team. And then when they score and celebrate, like I remember I used to have season tickets to the Jets for like 10 years. And my dad and I would go, or I'd go with Owen. And then like random people that I've never met before sitting around, it's like once we would score a touchdown, we just look around and we just start giving high fives and cheering like, yeah. And then like, it's an awesome experience. And, even like going on Twitter and like, if you both like the same team and you see someone else comment to defend your player or something like that, you're like, I like that guy.
There's a strong community element. And that's something that we wanted to, we really wanted to pull that thread and make it a huge part of our story.
But I think also, like, really at its core, it's really like a father-son story more so than anything else. Like that's like at its core, it's about like the kid's a diehard Ramgod fan in Barracudas. The dad is like doesn't know anything about it. He's like, he has to have the kid teach him the rules. Like, how does this work again? But he's a kick-ass athlete who's like a little bit past his prime, but has nothing really to lose and everything to gain, until he has everything to lose, and little to gain kind of thing. So it's like, that's kind of like the way the story goes, or how we have it play out, which is a lot of fun.
I think what I love the most is just both your enthusiasm about all of your projects, but specifically Ramgod here. I mean, the book, from the moment I saw it, immediately caught my eye, and I was interested in it.
Thanks,
so I love everything you guys are saying, and I think I could sit here and listen to you talk for another 2 hours about it. You're so enthusiastic. It's awesome. So the series, it's 6 issues, as you said. You're treating this as kind of the first season. You would hope that it can go on for a few more series, I'm assuming?
Yeah, like we already, as part of our initial pitch, we talked about where we take it in season 2 and season 3 kind of thing. And like the arc 1 or arc 2, arc 3, like, and where we would, like, there's a clip, like, we resolve a lot of stuff in the first mini arc, but then it clearly, you'll see it like opens the door to like a bigger one, and there's like a fun cliffhanger that you're like, ooh, I want this to keep going at the very end of it. And it's obviously a huge world too. It'd be a waste to just kind of like close the door on that. So there's, like, we always say we take a tight lens on a big world. So because you're so in it, we've made decisions, creative decisions on a lot of other things that really don't play a role in this sort of like introductory season, but that like we've already determined and thought about extensively, and how it affects the world and the characters in it. Like if you pay close attention as you're reading the entire book, like there's stuff in the background, even in the margins, like the little margin fillers that are at the top of each of the pages, right? That like show you, it's kind of hard to see, I know here, but anyway, there's what we call margin fillers. There's like UI elements at the top that have like different sponsors throughout. And it's all like, when we say sponsors, like fake sponsors, they're not real companies. They're companies that only exist in the world of Ramgod.
You brought up the video game element before. That was something that, like, when you're playing a video game, like there's stuff at the top and bottom of the screen sometimes, right? And we were like, what if we added that element to the comic itself, where you can put little clues?
Like if you played, like Fallout, for example, does this a lot, where they have like kind of like their little, fake ads and stuff throughout it. Yeah, there you go. Some of those things. So it tells you about like the air purity level. So like, remember Owen was saying like this was kind of birthed during COVID. So like the whole concept of like, why does everybody wear masks when they walk around? Is it just like fashion? It's like, no, it's because in certain areas and neighborhoods, the air quality is actually like dangerous. It's either high pollution, potentially airborne viruses. We're not 100% sure. Maybe they're not even real, and they're just sort of scaring people into doing this to be subservient. We don't know. But every neighborhood you go to, the more like generally the more poor it is, the more masked up you have to be. And then like, there's certain giant like skyscrapers that are just ventilation systems and like air purifiers that clean the air. So that was like a big aspect of the story. And we have these like fake ads throughout the book. So if you keep like kind of scrolling down, you'll get to like some fake companies that will tell you,
in-world ads.
In-world stuff. Like so the margin fillers here, like now we're in a bank scene. So all of the stuff is talking about NCIB, National, Center Integrated Bank, or whatever it is. That when the alarm, like it tells you if the sign alarm was triggered and things like that. So it's like kind of extra ways for us to do exposition without actually needing to explain it. It's just like, oh, that was fun.
Give some context more to like the sponsors and the big tech companies that exist in our world and things like that. There's some breadcrumb stuff, and we always set it up so there's like the A storyline, the B storyline, the C storyline, and those things evolve obviously with the series. So
I'm sorry, I was trying to see if I could find.
No,
like, is this what you guys are talking about? Like this?
Yeah, so like RGSN is not real, right? Ramgod, it's kind of like ESPN Plus, kind of, but it's just for Ramgod. So it's like you can't actually buy Ramgod Sports Network Plus, but like, so why put an ad in there for it? And it was like, well, we have to, like, sometimes, like, as far as pacing goes, we like putting, things like this next scene should really begin on like a page turn or something like that. So like we need to put something, but rather than putting like a real ad in there, we were like, let's create fake ads to like kind of help sell the world. So it doesn't actually pull you out of the world. If anything, it just puts you further into the world while creating that important sort of like pause or beat after an intense scene or whatever it may be, so that we can change over. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff throughout. And some of them are like very story based. They actually feed you important information in the story that's sort of meant, as Owen said, sort of meant to like plant a seed or be like a Easter egg or things like that. And they have news reports that talk about like where players might sign and things like that, or like, this person was this bank robbery went and like people are looking at this as a suspect or whatever else it may be. So a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, great ways to just continue world building, but in a different creative way as opposed to just more exposition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So currently, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 issues are out, available to everybody, and issue 3 will be out on the 25th of September.
Yeah, next week. Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess to kind of wrap it all up, the best way we could do that is where could people find you guys online, and B, where could they find Ramgod?
You can get Ramgod. You should be able to get Ramgod at your local comic shop, but you can also get it at massivepublishing.com directly from the website, like the publisher. But we always say, like, I generally say, like, first go to your local comic shop, right? Because it helps support local comic shops for one, and then 2, it also indirectly helps the publisher, because then if a comic shop sells out, 2, they may order 4 as like a reorder and stuff too, which is good, and it lets them know that it's a popular title, so they'll order more too, and just kind of help gets the word out too. And then as far as like following us, you're welcome to follow us personally on our like socials, but like at Dark Rose Studios, exactly how it sounds phonetically, Dark Rose Studios, and you can probably throw it on the screen somewhere. That's the best place to sort of like follow us, because that's generally where we put, like all of like we'll do like our
links below.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And then like you can go to our website, darkrose.io or darkrosestudios.com. We'll take you to show you pretty much all of our projects. One of the cool things we did on our website, when you go to originals on darkrosestudios.com, the originals tab, those are like our homegrown series and stories. We try to make it really easy to digest. So if you're what is this? Rather than having to like jump in and start reading a comic or something like that, we always give you like the log line, which is the equivalent of like if you're on Netflix or channel surfing and you click the little info button and it has that 1 or 2 sentences of like what it's about. And then like, like little comparisons. It's like this meets this, but in this setting. And then, what it exists as, right? Like it's a comic, it's also a video game demo, it's a board game, and here's where you can get that stuff. So like when you go to darkrose.io, also darkrosestudios.com, same thing, like, and you sort of like surf around there and you just kind of bounce around from all the different series and IPs that we've created, you'll be able to, it's all formatted in the same way. So it's like some dope art. We have artwork on everything. So even if it doesn't exist as a comic, but it mostly does, right? Like you'll be able to kind of gawk at the gorgeous artwork, because we've worked with some of the best artists in the world on our projects. We've been very fortunate to do that. Pick your poison, see what, speaks to you, and then shoot us an email or message us on IG or Facebook, whatever. Let us know what you think and what your thoughts are. And because we definitely listen. Like we're not like those type of like egotistical creatives that don't like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. It's like, yeah, give us your 2 cents. We'd love to hear feedback. What resonated with you? What didn't? Like what do you think is going to happen, kind of thing too, because we like trying to see if people can kind of figure out where we're going with it, which is pretty fun. And then like who's your favorite character, kind of stuff. Yeah.
Anything to add there, Owen?
Now you said it all.
So then to everybody out there listening and watching, even though Owen stole my line earlier, you can look down in the show notes down below for the links, as always. So make sure to check those out and ask your local comic shop for Ramgod. Morgan, Owen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
And learning more about Dark Rose and Ramgod and all that. Definitely have to do it again sometime. And just appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.